I've always thought of comic books as fairy tales for older people. When we were kids, most of us loved fairy tales. I think you never outgrow your love of these stories of giants and ogres and witches and all of that. Superhero comics give you that for older people. I was born in Manhattan. I lived in Manhattan most of my young life. Two of my big influences were books and movies. I loved Tarzan. I loved Jules Verne. I loved anything that was imaginative, that was high concept, that was a little bit bigger than life. I loved the movies I loved King Kong, Dracula, Frankenstein. My favorite hero was Errol Flynn. Oh man, the roles he played, he was to me, the ultimate superhero. He was, in fact, when I used to leave the theater after seeing an Errol Flynn movie, I'd be about 12 years old, I don't know. I'd walk down the street with a crooked little grin on my face, thinking it was the way he grinned. And I had an imaginary sword at my side. And I'd be looking around, hoping to see some bully picking on a little girl so I could defend her. It was always frustrating. I never found the bully. Probably lucky for me, because he would have killed me. But I wanted to be Errol Flynn more than anything I can think of. When I started in comics, I was hired by Joe Simon, who was the editor at Timely Comics. He and Jack Kirby, the artist-writer, were a team. In fact, in the beginning, Joe also drew and wrote, and I had trouble telling whether Joe had drawn something or whether Jack had, because their styles were very similar. And they were running the company really creatively. They were handling the books. And I was hired as more or less of a gopher. I'd get their coffee for them, and I'd also do proofreading and whatever had to be done. Then they let me write some stuff. They found out I could write a little bit. And I started writing a few of the scripts. It was fun. It wasn't really hard to do. And at some point, they left. And I was the only guy in the department who remained. I was about 17 years old, and the publisher, named Martin Goodman, the publisher said, "Hey, do you think you could hold down the job as editor until I get an adult, normal human being?" "Well, when you're 17, what do you know?" I said, "Sure, I could do it." And stayed there ever since. I guess he never found a normal human being. Worked there a year or so, and then I enlisted in the Army, because that was World War II. Before I got shipped overseas, somebody found out that I had been writing comic books. And they said they needed writers at the Army Filmmaking Division. I'm not sure what it was exactly called. Next thing I knew, I was shipped to Astoria, Long Island, where I was in company with William Saroyan, Frank Capra, people like that. And I ended up writing training films and instructional books for the troops. And they would ship me around the country wherever a post needed somebody to write training films or instructional books. And that was pretty much what I did during the war. And I did posters also. Some of the posters I did and the books that I wrote were really so great, the way we trained the troops, that in a way, I think I won the war single-handedly by some of these posters. After the war, when I was discharged, I went back to my job in the comics. I can tell you exactly when Timely Comics became Marvel. Actually, from Timely, they had a lot of other names in the interim. I don't remember all of them, but the last name they had before they became Marvel was Atlas Comics. And after we did the Fantastic Four, and we did the Hulk, Spider-Man, the X-Men, so forth, we suddenly began to realize, hey, we've got fans. We had never had fans before. We had never gotten fan mail before. But all of a sudden, with the start of our new superheroes, we got real letters. I like this, I don't like this, you did a great job on this. So I decided we ought to change the name of the company, get something better than Atlas. And the very first book that Martin Goodman had ever published, even before I came to work there, was called Marvel Comics. So I figured Marvel's a great word. And also, there's so much you could do with it. You could make up slogans and mottos. So I decided I would treat Marvel like a big advertising campaign. And I made up slogans like "Make Mine Marvel," "Marvel Marches On," "Welcome to the Marvel Age of Comics," things like that. And I came up with a lot of catchphrases. I would sign all the things I wrote with "Nuff Said" or "Hang Loose" or "Face Front." But I noticed that the competition was starting to use those expressions too. So I figured I've got to get something that they won't copy. And I tried to think of something A, they wouldn't know how to spell, and B, they wouldn't know what it means. And that's why I came up with the word Excelsior. I tried to inject a feeling of warmth in all the books. I always had the feeling that the other comic books, they had good stories, good artwork, everything was fine, but there was a detachment. Even in their letters pages, and they had very few. We were the ones who really made letters pages popular, but occasionally they'd run a letters page, and it would be like this: "Dear Editor, I read your story and I liked it, signed Charles Smith." And the answer would be, "Dear Charles, thank you very much, the editor." Well, I decided to run letters pages, but I wanted to make them friendly. I wanted the kids to feel a part of Marvel. So even if somebody wrote a letter that said "Dear Editor" to me, when I printed it, I wrote "Dear Stan." I changed the word editor to Stan. And when I answered the letter, instead of saying "Dear Charles," I'd say something like, "Hey, thanks a lot, Charlie," And I tried to keep the tone friendly, as if I'm a guy they know and we're just talking together. And after a while, it became very natural. And after a while, all the letters, "Hey, Stan, I loved your story. Hey, Stan, I hated your story," whatever it was. But it was like they knew me and I knew them. There was one time, and I don't even remember, it might have been the Fantastic Four or some other book. We had a story that I thought wasn't that good, but we were stuck with it. We had to send it out. There was the due date. I didn't have time to do it over. And on the cover, I wrote a little note. I don't remember the exact words, but something like, "Hey, kids, I've got to admit this isn't the best story we've ever done. But we've given you so many good ones before, we think you owe it to us to buy this one also." Everybody thought I was crazy, That book sold better than most of the others in that period. And I got a ton of mail saying, "You guys are great. Nobody else would have written anything like that." In our stories, I would occasionally have somebody die or introduce a serious subject. I didn't like to do it too much because basically I feel comic books, in fact, anything I do, whether it's comic books or movies or television or animation, should be entertaining. And I never want to, and most of what I do is for younger people. I consider people in their 20s younger. In fact, right now, I consider people in their 70s younger. But at any rate, it was for younger people. And I didn't feel they should be burdened with too much heavy stuff. I felt they should read my stories, enjoy them, and come away feeling better. But at the same time, in trying to inject some reality, some realism into the stories, and also to surprise the readers, because it's important for a reader never to know what's coming next. Thought occasionally I should have somebody die or get seriously ill, occasionally touch on some serious subject. Now, those are two separate things. The having somebody die was for the sake of drama and holding the reader's interest. The serious themes that I would occasionally inject were for another reason. I began to realize, judging by the fan mail that we received, I began to realize that our books had quite an influence on the readers. And I kind of took that seriously. I felt if these people are reading my words and the words of the other writers working for Marvel, I felt we've got to be careful and we've got to make sure that we're not giving them the wrong messages. So I don't like to preach. I hate people to preach to me, and I don't like to preach to other people. But at the same time, I feel there are kind of universal truths that nobody could quibble with. Like, to me, the most important mantra in the world is do unto others what you'd have them do unto you. I mean, I don't see how anybody could take issue with that, and I try to follow that, and I think if everybody followed it, the world would be paradise. If you'd never treat anybody the way you didn't want to be treated. So that's about as far as I'd get into religion. Just, I was opposed to bigotry. I was opposed to cruelty. I was opposed to demeaning women or other sexes, or not other, or other races or colors or creeds. So I would try occasionally to bring those themes into the books. Now, very often I'd get fan mail from people. What is your religion? What do you think of Christianity as opposed to Judaism, as opposed to Buddhism? Never got into that because I didn't feel it was our place to get into that sort of thing. And I would never, I would answer them, but I never answered the question specifically. I would tell them, we are purveyors of entertainment, we hope. The most important thing that I always tried to do was concentrate on the characters. Even before I would dream up the story, I would try to think, who are the characters? What are their personalities? What type of people are they? And why should a reader care about them? Why should a reader be interested in them? To me, the same thing holds for movies, television. You've got to have characters that the audience, the viewer, the reader cares about. Once you do that, making up stories is easy. Take even the Hulk, because I think this thing is devoted to the Hulk. Now, I wanted to get, originally my idea was to create a lovable monster. Sounds silly, and it probably was silly, but when I was a kid, I loved the Frankenstein movie, the one with Boris Karloff. I hadn't read the book. The movie was what really grabbed me. And I always felt that the monster, that the role that Karloff played, he was the good guy. He didn't want to hurt anybody. He didn't know what he was doing. The poor guy was taken from the dead. He had a brain slapped into him, and all these idiots with torches used to chase him up and down the hills, and he didn't know where to go or what to do. And I thought, I bet it would be fun to try to get a character who's kind of a monster, but he's really good. But just because he looks and acts like a monster, people hate him, fear him, hunt him, and try to destroy him. Okay, now that sounds kind of silly. So how do you make it realistic? How do you combine reality with fantasy? So I also loved the story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I liked the idea of this good guy who turned into a real evil man, could turn back and forth. The original Morpha. And I thought it might be interesting if my monster, who I decided to call the Hulk, if the Hulk could also be a normal person who for some reason turned into the Hulk. So the reader would have a normal person to sympathize with, care about, and believe in, and also have the Hulk to care about. Now, how would I make that credible? How would I make that so the reader would be willing to suspend disbelief and imagine it could happen? I had heard the expression gamma rays somewhere. Now again, I have no idea what a gamma ray is, but it sounds very scientific. So I figured, okay, somebody is building a gamma ray bomb, it explodes, and the radiation, the effects of the bomb hit our hero. Now to make him a hero, Bruce Banner, to make him a hero, he has to do heroic things. So in the beginning, there's this young boy, Rick Jones, I believe was his name, walking across the field where they were testing the bomb. And this idiot Jones didn't know there was a bomb being tested, and he'd have been killed. So our hero, Bruce Banner, sacrifices his own life to run out, save the kid. He throws himself on top of the kid. The bomb explodes. He gets hit by the radiation. Now, it's silly, but if you're willing to go along with the story and accept it, I felt, okay, I was willing to believe it. Why wouldn't the reader? To me, the ideal hero is a guy that you feel could exist in real life. And a guy that if he or she did exist in real life, you would like to know them or be friends with them. Then you've got the perfect superhero. I mean, Who wouldn't want to pal around with the Incredible Hulk? I mean, you wouldn't care what neighborhood you were walking down in, unarmed, if he was walking at your side. When I wanted to do that character, I thought to myself, how can I give him a costume? I'm going to be drawing a big monster. No monster is going to go out and put on a costume. But I knew that the kids like costumes. So I figured I'll do the second best. I'll give him a different color skin. Maybe that'll be the equivalent of a monster. Well, what color would I use? I figured maybe a mysterious-looking gray would be nice. Gray is kind of spooky and depressing and mysterious. So in the first issue, we colored him gray. But what happened was, for some reason, the printer had difficulty printing that gray color. And on some pages, he was light gray. On some pages, he was dark gray. On some pages, he looked almost black. And I figured, we can't have a hero whose skin color changes all the time. So I called the printer, hey, what colors can you print with no trouble? They said, oh, any of them. It's just gray is a little bit of a problem. So I thought, okay, what color isn't being used at the moment? And I figured, I can't think of any green characters. We'll make them green. I mean, it was just as casual as that. And it turned out to be a great choice because, as I mentioned sometime earlier, I love advertising and I love catchphrases. And by making them green, I was able to give them nicknames like the Jolly Green Giant, you know, the Green Goliath. So I'm very glad we made him green. My memories of the TV series are all very pleasant. The series was directed, and the first one was written, and maybe some of the others were written, by Ken Johnson, who to me is one of the most brilliant TV director-writers. And Ken and I had a few discussions before starting the live-action series. As you know, in the book, people have always said to me, don't you resent the fact that he was changed a little bit in the series? Hell no, every change was an improvement. You can't exactly replicate anything from one form of the media to the other. Things that work perfectly in comics won't work perfectly in movies. When I wrote the Hulk as a monster in comics, I had him talk the way a corny guy like me would figure a monster would talk. Me Hulk, me crush, things like that. So Ken said, hey, I'm not going to have him talk in the TV series. That would sound corny. He was 100% right. I didn't argue with him. I was glad he was smart enough to know not to do that kind of ridiculous dialogue for the movie series. Another very clever thing he did. If you remember the series, you only saw the Hulk for a few minutes in the beginning of the show and a few minutes at the end of the show. They made it the kind of show that adults would enjoy because the part with Bill Bixby was very realistic. Here was a man with a terrible affliction. He went from town to town, and every town he'd meet a new girl. There was always a new romantic interest. It was a very adult show. Then, for a few minutes, at the beginning and the end, he turned into the Hulk. Even the adults enjoyed that because it was done realistically. The Hulk didn't talk. He was there, he did what he had to do, and they got rid of him real fast. And it just worked so beautifully. And it was because Ken was smart enough to know if you did an hour show with just a green monster running around, it would look too silly. But the audience, the viewers, would wait for those few minutes when he'd appear. And women loved it. They loved that shot of his shirt beginning to rip as his shoulder got bigger and burst through. For some reason, so many women have told me, oh, I thought that was so cool, And it worked. It was just, it was a fine show and a big success. And a lot of that was due to Ken Johnson's interpretation of the Hulk. When I found out that they were changing the name from Bruce Banner to David Banner, I asked the logical question, why are you doing that? His name is supposed to be Bruce. And some genius at the network said, oh no, Stan, Bruce makes him sound homosexual. It sounds gay. I said, there's Bruce Jenner, the athletic decathlon champ. There's Bruce Well, I don't think I knew Bruce Willis at the time, but I mentioned it. Didn't faze him. No, we don't like the sound of Bruce. Said you can't change his name. He's been David Banner. He's been Bruce Banner for all these years, but they were the network and they were in charge. You know, I was in one of the Hulk episodes, the justly famous trial of the Incredible Hulk. I mean, people go from far and wide to get a tape of that because, well, it was a very funny situation. It was a little cameo. The Hulk was on trial, and there was a scene shot in the courtroom, and there was the jury box with the 12 members of the jury. I was one of the members of the jury. In fact, I'm very proud to say I was the foreman. Now, I'm sitting in the jury box. I didn't have anything to say. I'm sitting in the jury box, and at some point, the Hulk angrily gets up from the witness chair, comes over to the jury box, and he lifts it up from the bottom with all 12 people in it. Now, obviously, it was done. There was a hydraulic lift under the box, but it looked as if he was doing it. He only lifted it about that much off the floor, just to show his strength. The idea was the jurors were supposed to jump out of the box and run away in fear. So I was happy, you know, I couldn't wait. He lifted the box. I started to jump. And Bill Bixby, I believe it was Bill who was directing it, he said, "Cut! Stan, I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "You don't jump out of the box." I said, "Oh, you mean I'm brave and I stay here?" He said, "No, you're not a stunt man. You can't jump. We got to put a stunt man in there to jump out of the box." I said, "Bill, it's this high off the ground. I could step out of the box." "No, that's considered a stunt." I had to leave the jury box. My stunt double came in, and he jumped out. I was so mad. I want to jump out of the box. Wouldn't let me do it. When I watched the Hulk on the screen, or when I watched X-Men or Spider-Man, believe me, I am watching just like any member of the audience. I'm watching it, and I'm enjoying it. And if there's anything that's a little not good, I'm not liking that part. And I'm never saying to myself, gee, I'm the guy who started it. That thought isn't even in my mind. I just watch it like I watch any other show. And I sometimes wonder why that is. Shouldn't it be different? But it isn't. It's like I watch any movie, and I watch the Hulk, or I watch the others, and I got to admit, I like them. When I started in comics, nobody had any respect for the medium. And, you know, I'm going back to the early 1940s. In fact, I'd meet people at a party. They'd say, "What do you do?" I didn't want to tell them I was in comics. I'd say, "Oh, I'm a writer." And I'd start to walk away, but they'd follow me. "Well, what do you write?" And I'd say, "Stories." It didn't help. "Well, what kind of stories?" "For children." "Really? What's the name of the magazines?" At some point, I had to say comics, and they would turn around and walk away as if I had the plague. And things have changed. Now, of course, I walk into a room and they push past President Bush and all the other celebrities. "Hey, there's Stan Lee. He's in comics." I've been lucky in a number of areas. I have a great wife, a great daughter. But in that one area, I have been extremely lucky because I love to write. Well, that isn't true. I hate to write, but it comes easy to me. And I write fast because I don't like to write, and I like to get finished quickly. But I enjoy it after I finish, knowing that I've done it. But I enjoy the people I work with, because I work with writers, with artists, now with directors, producers. And I'm always working in an atmosphere where we're trying to think of what can we do now? What kind of movie can we do? What kind of television show? What kind of book? I've often thought it's really tragic. There are so many people whose jobs are just jobs. I mean, they go to work because they have to make a living, but it's nothing that they really enjoy doing, and that's really most of the world. And I really have a great sympathy for most of the working people. And I'm aware that I'm incredibly lucky because of the work I do, and so is anybody who really enjoys his work, whether he's a shoemaker or a sportsman, anybody. If you enjoy your work, I think that's one of the secrets of some sort of happiness. Excelsior!